Welcome back everyone to another episode of the Dartmoor Diaries. Autumn has well and truly arrived on the moor, the mornings are crisp, the air smells faintly of wood smoke, and the leaves have begun their slow, theatrical descent across the garden. We've woken to some spectacular sunrises this week, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, best enjoyed, I might add, from the warmth of the annex kitchen with a strong cup of tea in hand. We took a slow walk around the garden to gather a few logs we'd trimmed from one of our old beech trees a few months ago. They've now been moved into the coach house to start drying out, ready for the colder days ahead. Watson is planning to cut them up later this week, as part of the long list of tasks he's already created for himself. This firewood will join the ever-growing, but also ever-decreasing pile that's keeping us nice and snug most evenings. This week we're back in the boiler room, the unglamorous heart of the house. However, we hope that won't be the reality for long, as we have a rather promising design in mind to make this room both functional and stylish. But let's see. We've had to push the installation date back a little, as we didn't quite get as much finished as we'd hoped. To add to the excitement, one of our suppliers isn't able to send their technical team over next week, so everything has now been rescheduled for the beginning of November. In truth, this might work out for the best. There's still plenty to get through down here, and with the extra time we might finally catch up with ourselves. The week began with me giving the boiler room a much-deserved wash. As you know, it's been home to the biomass boiler's wood pellet hopper for quite some years, and had developed what one might politely call a light dusting of wood dust, from head to toe and in every imaginable crevice. So it was time for a proper scrub. Once the walls were washed down and the concrete floor given a thorough cleanse, the transformation was remarkable. For the first time, we could actually see the space as it really is, clean, empty, and ready for what comes next. Now that the dust has quite literally settled, we can finally get on with the 100 or so jobs that need doing to turn this into our new and rather more respectable boiler room. This end wall, now rendered, was once upon a time the original exterior wall of the house, and despite the hopper room having been added many years ago to house the biomass system, it had still managed to cultivate a fine layer of Dartmoor's signature moss. I gave it a thorough blast followed by several careful rounds of antifungal treatment, ensuring, of course, that none of it found its way outside. After a few days, the wall was looking remarkably improved, clean, dry, and free from any lingering growth. Only a few faint stains remain, marking where the moss once made its home. With a bit of drying time, which for once didn't take long, Watson was able to jump back in and start framing up the space. We've decided that every wall in the house, where possible, will be insulated as we go, especially this one. It sits on a particularly exposed corner of the house, which takes the full brunt of Dartmoor's wild weather and high winds, so anything we can do to make this space warmer and more comfortable will also help the next room along. The framing on this wall will allow us to add 100mm of insulation, creating a solid thermal barrier. Once that's in, the studwork will be clad with OSB, adding extra strength and giving us a sturdy surface for anything that needs to be mounted later. With a fair bit of measuring, levelling, cutting and gluing, Watson set about building the studwork that will sit on either side of the new doorway, the one that will eventually lead through into the next room. The hinged side of the frame was reinforced and double-studded for extra strength, before all the uprights were fitted neatly into place. Finally, the base plates were anchored down into the concrete slab, giving the whole structure a solid footing to build from. With a shake or two, not unlike mixing my favourite amaretto sour, I took on the rather satisfying task of filling the gaps between the old wall and the wooden framed boiler room. These spaces had never been properly sealed, and before Watson could continue with the stud work, it was important to get them filled to help stop any future draft sneaking into the room or behind the new walls. Spray foam, as anyone who's used it will know, is an unpleasant but necessary invention, and one that can get out of hand with just a little too much enthusiasm. So, with steady hands and cautious presses, I worked my way along the gaps. Fortunately, it behaved itself this time, and there were no runaway foam eruptions to deal with. Once everything is finished inside, we'll also make sure to seal things properly from the outside, just to keep the Dartmoor weather exactly where it belongs, outdoors. We've made sure that, even though all the new studs are already pressure treated, each piece has still had a generous dousing of woodworm treatment before going up. There are a few signs of old woodworm activity in parts of the main house, so for extra peace of mind, and since we already had the treatment on hand, every length of timber, old and new, has been given a good coat. It's one of those simple steps that feels worth the extra effort, especially in a house of this age. Next, a few noggins were added to help strengthen the door studs and prevent any twisting or movement in the frame over time. They also add a good bit of extra stability and rigidity to the structure, small pieces that make a big difference in keeping everything square and solid for the years ahead. Then came the dreaded task, fitting the insulation. I don't think anyone could honestly describe this as enjoyable. It's itchy, awkward, and seems to have a mind entirely of its own. For this room, we're using Ecowool, which is a glass mineral wool insulation made primarily from recycled glass. It's produced with a plant-based formaldehyde-free binder, making it safer to be around and much softer to handle than traditional insulation. We always try to use materials that are formaldehyde-free, as we really don't want that anywhere in the house. So for now, Ecowool is a sensible and safer choice for us. Long-term, in the main parts of the house, like the living room, kitchen, bedrooms and bathrooms, we'd love to use 100% wool insulation. It's more expensive, but it's also natural, far safer to live with, and has some brilliant properties. It keeps the warmth in during winter and helps maintain coolness in summer, while naturally providing thermal comfort, sound insulation, and even improving indoor air quality through its ability to regulate humidity and absorb pollutants. Wool is hygroscopic, meaning it can absorb and release moisture from the air, helping to maintain a stable humidity level and prevent condensation, all without losing its insulating effectiveness. It's also naturally fire retardant, renewable, and has a low embodied energy compared to synthetic materials. And perhaps most importantly, at the end of its life, wool can be composted and is biodegradable. So if a future custodian of this house ever decides to change things again, they won't be adding more man-made, non-recyclable materials to landfill. The wool is treated to make it insect-resistant and does have a slightly lower R value compared to man-made fibres. But for us, using natural, environmentally friendly materials is the top priority. We've started reaching out to a few suppliers to see if, by buying in bulk at trade pricing, we can make it financially more workable, so we'll see what happens. For now though, Ecowool is our preferred man-made option, so with mask and goggles on, for as long as I could wear them before they steamed up completely that is, and every inch of skin covered, I got on with what Watson and I now refer to as installing the Wookiee. In the meantime, Watson had been cutting strips of OSB and gluing them to the studs to help even out the levels, ready for the plasterboard installation. The next task for me was to get the door prepped and painted. After a few dents and holes had been filled and sanded smooth, I gave it a fresh coat of Dulux Weather Shield, a paint we've used overseas with great results, and one that's now become our go-to for exterior work. We decided on a satin finish rather than high gloss, as it feels more in keeping with the style of the house and has a softer, more understated look. The high gloss, we think, will be reserved for the front door, where a bit of shine feels more fitting. I might add that we've had quite a few very cold days up here on the moor, the sort that make you question every life choice that led you to live at altitude. I'm currently sporting 5 layers, including 2 thermals, 2 jumpers, and a fleece, which only just seem to be keeping me warm. It's definitely going to take a few years to adjust back to this climate. Watson had asked if I could paint some bitumen paint around the new floor drain in the boiler room, the one we cut into the slab a few weeks ago. He kindly drew out the shape he wanted me to follow with blue chalk, just to make sure we had the good coverage, which, as you might expect by now, I couldn't resist turning into another work of art. As we seem to have quite a large population of slugs here on the moor, and particularly at our house, I decided that this black shape should be transformed. Now, it could be a slug, or perhaps the head of a butterfly. I'll let you decide which you prefer. Watson then set about installing the door lining, followed quickly afterwards by the door frame, which was a great achievement, as everything had been taking more time than we had hoped last week. So to be able to get this in and get a step closer to sealing the room back up from the elements felt like we were finally getting there. With a bit of tapping back and forth on the door frame, we finally got it sitting just where we wanted it, allowing room for the black cement board to be fitted neatly underneath and leaving space for the first paving stone to sit slightly tucked in beneath when we eventually get to that stage in the future. With the door frame secured in place and the wind howling outside, Watson pre-drilled the holes for the hinges, fixed them onto the frame, and then removed them again. A small but clever step that makes hanging the door much easier later on, as everything is already perfectly aligned and ready to go. He then retreated to the coach house to fit the same new shiny hinges onto the door itself, ready for it to be hung a few minutes later. With the door hung, it was now time for the moment of truth, to see whether we'd need to trim anything off, or if by some small miracle it was all going to fit perfectly first time. And, of course, it wasn't meant to be. I'm not sure we've ever hung a door that fits perfectly first time. There has to be a first, but this wasn't it. Watson had to shave off a tiny bit all the way up, checking between each pass to make sure he didn't overdo it. Luckily, by the third run with the planer, it was spot on. We'd love to hear in the comments if anyone else encounters this same issue, or if there are any great tricks to be learned when it comes to hanging doors. We've got quite a few to take down, strip, sand and rehang, so any advice or words of wisdom would be very welcome. And yes, Watson did in fact close the door on his fingers, a true schoolboy error, and one I'm fairly certain he'll manage to repeat again in the future. With the lock in place and working beautifully, Watson used the template to chisel out the plate on the other side, and finally, success. The door was hung, opening and closing with zero effort, and bolting shut nice and firmly. A very happy Watson indeed. We've been working morning and night this past week hoping to meet our original deadline. But as always, things take longer than you expect, even when you have prior experience behind you. Renovations can be a slow process, and this week certainly felt like one of those times. We managed to get through a lot of fiddly jobs, one of which was for Watson to rebuild the cladding on the front of the boiler room now that the door was in place. This meant we could finally get on with the inside work without the risk of the weather joining us. First, the old vapour barrier had to be removed where it was ripped and torn, and then replaced so the entire structure was fully wrapped once again. It's actually quite a satisfying job. The moment it's up, you immediately feel as though the whole building has been tucked in, and the wind can no longer find its way inside. With brand new battens fitted and the necessary packers in place along the base, Watson pulled back the gravel and soil from the base of the boiler room slab, added some glue, and slid the final pieces of cement board trim into place, making the front side line up beautifully with the other two sides that were already complete. With that complete, Watson set to work finishing the cladding. With a bit of planning, he managed to reuse about 90% of the original boards and even line up all the old screw holes, which was a small miracle in itself. We only needed to add a few new boards to complete the front section, and the final result looks great. As Watson worked, he coated all the joins with wood oil to help protect them, along with all the hidden boards below. That allowed me to come along afterwards and give the finished cladding a few coats of oil so it's properly protected going forward. The boards will take a little time to settle and balance themselves out. In theory, if we were in a warmer climate, we'd leave them for a few weeks to soften before adding the oil. But here in the UK, with plenty of rain around this time of year, it's much better to protect them now and let them age naturally with the oil, rather than with the elements. With the boiler room now sealed from the elements, we headed back inside to tackle one critical job before the plumbers could come in. We needed to run all of our electrical cabling from the switchboard back into the boiler room, as well as add the new water pipework that will connect to our water filtration system, which is also being relocated into this space. At the same time, we needed to run a few additional water pipes across to the other side of the boiler room, ready for the next stage of the installation. With darkness upon us, we had to make the most of every hour last week. Watson drilled through the incredibly hard render on what was once the original exterior wall to create a neat and tidy row of holes for the electrical cables and water pipes that needed to pass from one side of the room to the other. He then headed up into the roof of the old machine room next door, which turned out to be a rather unpleasant experience. The space is full of insulation that appears to have provided great entertainment for a family of mice at some point in its history. They seem to have made nests by shredding the insulation into pieces and flinging it about to see where it might land. There's also what one presumes was once a blue carrier bag, now reduced to confetti-like bedding, and a fair amount of mouse poo collected neatly in one corner. Clearly this all happened quite some years ago, as the Duchy of Cornwall, or perhaps the previous tenants, had left a few mousetraps up there, none of which had ever been triggered. So it seems they won their battle with the mice, and none have returned since. Of course, it's yet another thing for us to clean up at some point, but not today. Heating takes priority over housekeeping for now. With the electrical cables run, including the earth wire for the new boiler, Watson was able to pull them all through into the boiler room and label everything clearly so everyone would know what was what, and more importantly, so we wouldn't forget either. I will add, however, that to my absolute horror, he managed to pull out some of the Wookiee that had already been put neatly into place, which meant I'd have to go back and redo parts of it all over again. Not impressed was the phrase that immediately came to mind. Next on our ever-growing list for the week was sealing the floor so we could pour some self-levelling compound on either side of the boiler room. When washing down the floors and walls, it became clear there was a slight dip on the left-hand side where water tended to pool, so it was important to correct that and ensure both edges of the room had a gentle pitch to guide any water neatly towards the floor drain. As, after all, we'll have our water filtration system sat in this room, and although we don't plan for any of the fittings to ever fail, it's best to prepare for the worst, hence why we've installed a floor drain, so there'll be zero damage to any of the wooden framing or anything else sitting on the floor in this space. We added the self-levelling compound to both sides of the room, which has helped create just the right amount of fall we need. Any final adjustment, if necessary, can be done later with the tile adhesive, but after checking with the spirit level, it looks like we're spot on already. So finally, after a long week on the tools and far too much time spent wrestling with the Wookiee for my liking, we're ready to start sheeting the walls and ceiling and to lay our tiles. We had hoped to get to laying the tiles this week, but we didn't quite make it as far as sheeting the walls as planned. Perhaps we were just being a little too optimistic. We'll be working on that behind the scenes this week so that we can get the tiles down over the weekend and start finishing the walls and adding a bit of colour. We're really looking forward to showing you more very soon and seeing how it all starts to come together. And that's where we'll leave it for this week. If you've been enjoying our ongoing antics and this slightly unpredictable renovation journey, please do give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. It really does make a huge difference and helps us keep sharing our story here on the moor. A big thank you, as always, to everyone who joins us each week. We love reading your comments and hearing your thoughts, so do let us know what you think below, and we'll see you next time on the Dartmoor Diaries.